Josh, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Relational horsemanship. That is a term that not everyone who's listening to this podcast will have heard before. And it is really important to talk about this first because it is
Mhm.
through this lens that we're going to talk about everything else that we're going to talk about today with spooking and shying and horse behavior. What do we need to know about relational horsemanship and the approach that you bring to horsemanship and horse training?
Cool. Good question. Good place to start. Um, my perspective has always kind of been a balance of two things. We're as horse people, we are desiring to enjoy these animals and go out and do fun things.
Hmm.
But on the other side of that is an animal that is doing their best to figure out life and understand how to survive and then how to be with us. Um, in my journey, I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of things, and from being a cowboy to learning classical dressage to roping to working on dressage movements. And the thing that in the process that I've just really worked towards trying to find clarity in is what does it mean to be in relationship with horses, and not necessarily just with horses but with equipment, with each other, with the world. And as we understand what it means to be in relationship with, all of a sudden the things that we're desiring to do move more away from conflict and more into connection. For us to really enjoy anything that we're wanting to do in life, being out of relationship takes us away from soul connection and then deeper fulfillment. And it turns more into making something happen physically. And that really isn't what life's about. Somewhere deep within us, we all desire to be with horses because of this soul connection, not just because we want to win a ribbon. Those things come and that's awesome. But there's something about horses that draws 90% of the population because of some deep feeling, some deep connection that we have, or desire to have. And that's really the birthplace of relational horsemanship. Is it's like, what does it mean to be in relationship with this animal so that we can meet each other's needs and find joy in the relationship? But also, what does it mean to be in relationship with their body so that they can use their bodies right and they can stay sound and be athletic and do their job to the best of their ability, and last long into their 20s and 30s or whatever for each horse, so that we're honoring them mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. So the idea of relational horsemanship is just to understand that your horse has needs mentally and physically. And if we can meet those needs, it creates an entirely different relationship that allows us to find a sense of community with each other, and allows joy to be the product or the mutual product. Relationship speaks to two sides. It's not just one. And sometimes horsemanship can kind of turn into that. It's like, how do I get what I want? And there isn't necessarily a consideration for what's happening on the other side of it. So we're looking to meet a horse's needs and build connection in the process of doing whatever it is you want to do.
So often, I think we think of horse training, especially in the sport world, as building skills that we instill the learning that we might have, as trainers or
Mm-hmm.
as riders. We give that to our horse, and we teach
Mm-hmm.
them to um, have the competence and the confidence to do these certain skills. But it's very much kind of like working with the outside of the horse. And one of the things that you
Mm-hmm.
said to me that I really appreciated was that when you work with the inside of the horse, the outside result comes much faster because you can really have a lot of these horses that are incredibly athletic and can do a lot of amazing things with their bodies. Sometimes we're even mistaking tension for power.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're working with the inside of the horse, it allows the athletic development to happen with less tension and with
Mm-hmm.
more harmony and with more progression.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's not what we're taught when
Mhm.
most of us are taught to ride. We learn how to walk, and we learn how to steer,
Mhm.
and we learn how to post, and we learn all of these things. And everyone kind of comes to this point in their horsemanship and their riding journey, probably at a different time.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious when that time came for you.
I have always been a person who doesn't like to be outside of relationship. Um, when if you're doing something with someone and there's relational infrequency, things aren't right. It to me it takes all the joy out of it. It takes all the connection. And what we also observe is when you're not in relationship, even the simplest of tasks become challenging. And
Hmm.
that's really what I find for people with horsemanship is that the people would generally want help with getting a horse to do something. But what we don't recognize is that the reason the horse is struggling is because they don't feel safe. They're being misinterpreted. They're being judged. Our pressures are coming based on negative interpretations. And then what happens is our horses are struggling with the inside connection. And then they preserve their outsides because it's no different than people. If a person doesn't feel safe, they don't feel heard, they don't feel um, like a person cares, they will protect themselves. And a lot of people come to me because their horse is protecting themselves, and then they want to find a way to get the horse to do A, B, or C. And what I've observed through my learning is that the reason your horse is protecting yourself and not doing the technique has nothing to do with the technique. It has everything to do with the fact that the horse doesn't feel safe. They don't feel their needs are being met. So then they need their body if they need to protect themselves. So they won't release themselves to the work.
Hmm.
Now, that leads me also to the power of interpretation. And a lot of people, the issue, and I always start with this, is that we must gain a little bit more stock to the importance of the lens that you look through. Because if you believe your horse is trying to be bad, if you believe your horse is trying to get away with things, you will always use pressure in a more disciplinary way to create obedience in the physical body. And this is actually a real problem because that creates a linear pathway to process that actually interferes with healthy relationship. So if I say to myself, every time you say a certain thing, you're trying to be rude, you're trying to be aggressive with me, you're being disrespectful, but that isn't your heart, you see, this becomes the biggest blocker of relationship because now I'm looking at you through my lens. I'm not hearing you through your own. So one of the big pieces of relational horsemanship or the concept is just that I'm doing my best to understand where the horse is coming from. I need to understand their needs. I need to understand what they need to feel safe. And if I can figure that out and I can provide them with that, all of a sudden they actually don't care what we do. They don't,
Hmm.
it's again, it's no different than people. If you feel safe and you love being with this person, shoot, it doesn't matter if we're going to go for a walk or a bike ride. It's like whatever. I don't care. I'm
Right.
just happy to be with you. So that's really the heartbeat. Um, and then it steps into that actually releases the horse's physical body to be schooled. Without a sense of safety, their bodies are defensive but also tight. So the primary reasons for the physical tensions actually come from internal negative belief systems that the horses have in association to how we look at them. So there's a philosophical approach or mindset that needs to happen first before we can actually train.
Hmm. One of the things that you said there that really resonated with me is when you're really in sync with somebody, you don't care what you're doing together. And like,
Mhm.
man, haven't I hope that everyone that's listening, that we've all been able to have that experience with somebody
Yeah.
that you feel, whether it's your best friend or your partner or whatever the case may be. Like, uh, yeah, I used to joke with one of my good friends. I'm like, I don't know, I feel like we could like sit in a cardboard box
Yeah.
together and like we would still be having the time of our lives. Like
Totally.
it just doesn't matter. And I think that's
Mhm.
a beautiful way to think about our relationship with our horses.
Mhm.
And it's also it's permission for us to really have varied experiences with our
Mhm.
horses. Like there's no, I think in the sport world we often think about like all of the work happening in the arena. It's important for our development and for our horses development mentally to do different types of things together
Mhm.
and not just have one type of experience together. Josh, you keep referring to having the horse's needs met, and oftentimes we can see some sort of physical manifestation of the horse's needs not being met through things
Mm-hmm.
like tension and behavioral issues. What are those needs?
Yeah, good question. Um, I think that the horse has three major needs, and those are mind, space, and pressure. A horse a horse needs to know who's taking care of their world, the world around them, and how they interact with it. Um, Horses are prey animals, and if what is happening in their mind is not a part of our relationship, if where their thoughts are is not something we're attending to, the horses are always feeling like they need to keep track of their own world. And if that's happening, well, that's what starts herd boundness and um,
Mm-hmm.
anxieties in their world of what they're looking at, because we're not actually talking to them about what they're looking at. So there's a work in association to my training where you actually make connection to the thing they're looking at, and you allow them to feel how you feel about that thing. And you also ask questions that prioritize seeing them let go of a thought or change a thought, so that they actually feel like you're talking to their mind. You're not just working their physical body. So being in relationship with the horse's mind allows you to actually communicate with their thoughts instead of just moving their physical body around while their mind is doing all these other things, which is actually where a lot of the tension comes from. So it's not even of their physical body. It's because the mind and the body are divided. The second one is pressure. Pressure is a force in the world that horses have to know how to control. Most of the time, we look at pressure from a predatorial perspective. Horses move away from pressure. That is a common belief system, and it's true, but it's true in its predatorial system. It's not necessarily true in its relational system. And what I want to do with pressure is I want to help and work with my horses in a way where they understand how to control pressure, because that's what they need. They need to know how to control pressure to feel safe. But I want them to learn how to control it by staying with me mentally and softening internally. So there's internal release systems to pressure, not necessarily external responses. External response comes in time, but it isn't the primary. It's not the primary thing, because if you move a horse with pressure before you change their internal medium, you will be a victim to their nature. You will be moving them and they will be taking it in a predatorial mindset if you're not transforming it in some way to help them understand how to control it in an internal manner.
And that's going to color every other aspect of your relationship with that horse.
Absolutely everything. You can't put a leg on a horse or pick up the bridle if you are stepping into their world in any way. If you haven't helped them understand how to control pressure in a new way, you will be a victim to their nature.
Mm-hmm.
So then again, that's where so many people bump up into so many issues, because they haven't had that conversation. They haven't prioritized changing how the horse looks at pressure. We're just using how the horse looked at the world, and now you are a victim to their natural way of looking at life. That's going to lead us into the next topic we're going to talk about, but that's primarily the problem. So you let them control it, but you teach them how to do it through mental presence, that they can control pressure by mentally connecting with you, but also internally releasing. And that's another piece to the puzzle of relationship, that you're talking to the inside and how the inside felt, not necessarily what the outside simply did. Mm. And the other is space. Space is one of the most misinterpreted forms of communication with horses. And it is prevalently believed that if horses push into your space, it's a sense of disrespect or disobedience, or they're trying to be bad. And the reason we do that is because in our human realm, if someone were to push into us, it would be them kind of puffing up, getting aggressive, being rude. Right. Yeah. So we just immediately transpose that to our horses. But horses are energetic creatures that have to connect to feel. So a lot of times what happens is you take an animal that needs to connect energetically to feel you with humans that are doing this because of a life of trauma and not wanting to be judged and, being insecure. We don't just live openly in our own space. Okay. We live protecting ourselves. Well, now you take a horse that needs to connect, and now they want to get close to you to feel you. And we say, don't get close to me. You're being disrespectful. So you begin taking from the horse one of their primary forms of connection, which is to feel us. So we're saying, no, don't connect with us, which again leaves them in a place where they need to be on their own. So they look at the world through their own lens. So
Josh, are you saying that we should let our horses walk all over us? Of course not. So what do you
right.
mean?
Yeah, good question. And that's oftentimes what people hear first.
Right.
What I'm saying is if you feel a horse trying to reach for you, you need to let them feel you. We need to get to a place where we're more openly able to feel our own space, spend time in our own space. So I won't, when a horse reaches for me, let's say, and sometimes and this is where you get some horses that'll even bite, like a horse that's more space horse based. Every horse will be like, I go through like mind horses, space horses, and pressure horses. A space horse is one of those horses that's they're kind of all over you because they need to feel you to feel safe. Okay. So what I do is I actually will still engage my space. I'm going to work with the horse, but it's not to get the horse out of your space. It's to connect. But what you have to figure out is at what distance, at what level do you want to connect with your horses? Some people like them to be closer. Cool. But make sure there's clarity in what you're giving off. Some people want them a little farther back. That's cool too. But you have to get to a place where your energy is coming out of you so they can feel you. It's different than saying, get out of my space with an aid, because what you're actually doing is you're dividing the ability for the horse to feel you. You're pushing them away. They will never stay there then. They will just keep coming back. And so this is where people, they have problems with horses pinning their ears and nipping, because the horse is saying, if we're going to connect, I need to feel you, and not feeling you is driving me crazy. So then they get more bothered. And then we think we have more of a problem and we want to get bigger, which actually drives the horse crazy again. But if you can get to a place where you can emit your own space and feel around yourself and emit your energy, you see, now you're truthful in your own space. You're being in your own space. And when you do that, now the horse can feel you at a distance and they don't have to get closer to you. So generally, when horses push into our space, it's a statement of what they can't feel in us. So what it does for me is it just awakens in me, Josh, show up, be heard, be honest, be authentic, let them feel you. You see, so it ends up leading us back to.
Yeah, or just like pay attention. Like
totally.
Pay attention. Like
totally.
that, I feel like that's my thing. And so many people are going to be able to relate with this, like, or relate to this when I'm physically with my horses, but mentally I'm at work, or I'm at the grocery store, or I'm picking my kids up from school, or I'm, wherever else I'm needed. I have to really work on mentally being present. The way that I have found that works for me to do that is to be extremely curious about my horse at all times. Like, be really looking, like, what is his body doing? What is his, like, to really be thinking about, what am I seeing? What am I feeling in this moment? Like, that kind of snaps me into the present. And I've actually done a little bit of work on a horse that I have that is kind of nippy and like ear pinny, nothing crazy, but just a little bit. And I've sort of played around with, when he does that, first of all, how am I approaching him? Like, am I just like barging in, like, the devil wears Prada, and like walking into his stall, walking into his space, having no respect for his space, but then being super offended if he, encroaches on my space. And that's been a really interesting thing to sort of play around with. And mostly it's just been play, that I've sort of experimented with that through. And now that we're talking about this, I actually can't remember the last time he did it. Like the last time he was, it kind of disappeared. It wasn't like a moment. It wasn't a training moment where I was like, I set this boundary and then he never did it again. I don't know when it happened. It just sort of gradually, like, we just feel more in sync and that behavior kind of went away.
Sorry.
Please.
Yeah, the two things that cause people to get out of their space is that we have huge brains. So our energy goes here and we think, and also the trauma of life. Those are the two things that cause us to cave. And I actually don't like people to think of it like a training exercise. This is a way of being. You have to get to a place where more authentically, what you want your horse to feel, you have to let out of your body. Okay, so what you
Mm,
want them to understand, it's not just your stick, because a lot of times people can be energetically like this and then using your stick,
yeah.
and all
Yeah.
that'll do is irritate your horse, because it's like, okay, what does this mean? It is your energy that allows horses to feel you. It's when you watch someone who's competent, it's as if they're using their aids, but they're not really, because their energy is consuming the aid. The energy gives knowledge to the horse through the aid, instead of it just being a pressure. So what you've explained is that you became more authentic. Your energy was leaving your body more often, so your horse wasn't wondering. So a lot of times I just encourage people to recognize that. Like, if your horse is struggling, first of all, you have to diagnose a little bit about what their need is. Is this a mind horse? Is this a space horse? Is this a pressure horse? Now they're all everything,
Hmm.
but a lot of them are something more. So if
Hmm.
it's a space horse, like maybe this horse you've given an example of, and you begin showing up more authentically, it's like, oh, they feel safer because they feel heard. They feel their need being met. If they're a pressure horse, and this is going to be leading us into the spooky horses, if you don't help them understand a new way to think under pressure, that's never changing. There's no technique that fixes it, because if your needs are not met, there's no thing you're going to do, like no like walk or hike or conversation that fixes it when your insides don't feel heard. Like,
Hmm.
this is the art of relationship. Like, if you don't feel heard and someone else doesn't feel heard, good luck. It's already done. You're just now fighting with all the exterior things. Well, you said this or you did that. The horse did this. How do I stop that from happening? We're missing the point. And this is kind of the universal element of this, is like, universally, all things desire to be heard and desire their needs to be met. And any place we have a sense of that, we're drawn to. And that kind of leads us to what leadership is. Like, leadership is being something within ourselves and meeting a need in another in such a way that they want to be around us. So when horsemanship is about trying to make stuff stay, again, we're missing the point. This is where dominance comes in. So I'm not trying to make it into some floofy approach to where we're not doing anything. But I want us to understand what it is our horses need, so we can meet that need, so we can actually go and conquer the world together. Like, that's my goal, right?
Yeah. We're going to talk about spooking and fear and tension and shying and all of those things, and those words I feel like can apply to both the human and the horse.
Mm,
Um, and we've talked a little bit about the horse's natural way of being, but as we have a conversation about spooking, what do we need to know about the horse and how they perceive the world to have
mm,
that conversation?
yeah. Well, initially, horses look at the world from a predatorial perspective, and they will always think of running first. So we should never get bothered by a horse that wants to run first, that gets nervous or spooky. That's what's in them. I always joke, I say that's the stock model. Like, that's what came. That's what comes in the stock model. So if that's what's happening, then we haven't changed or upgraded from the stock model. We're still dealing with that. Okay, now horses need to control pressure, and this is our way in. If you can help them understand how to control pressure in a new mind, you take them out of their self preserving perspectives and you bring them into a thinking state. Now, this is one of the beautiful things about horse human relationships. We, because of our influence and our thinking brain, we have the ability to help horses understand how to control pressure in a new way that removes their necessity to control pressure through fear. And it
Mm.
grants them our ability to look at the world, which is how horses can now be war horses, instead of fear-based creatures who are running from everything. But the first thing is that we must first off understand what their need is, and then start to build mechanism around how can we help them understand how to meet that need. So this just touches gently on a couple training ideas, but um, the first thing pressure does with horses is that it will chase their mind away. They will run mentally away from it. And one of the exercises that I'll play with is let's just say a horse is nervous of something, and I might have it in my hand, and I'll just kind of move it. And if they turn and look at it, I'll take it away. So they start learning, if they engage it, they can control it, instead of it having to run first. And then the second piece is that, I spend a lot of time, we talked about body mapping and what it means to feel the inside of a horse. Like,
Yeah.
how has the world impacted our horses is written in the code of their muscles. And being able to connect to that and feel change is crucial. And that's getting a little steeper into the training, but that's how you develop contact and how you develop the relaxation of the top line to allow athleticism. But it's rooted in an emotional definition. So when a horse gets nervous or scared of something, they become tight and defensive, and now they can't do A, B, or C in the training. So if we can feel what's in the muscles and help the muscles learn to soften, and we can release when those muscles soften all the way through the body, then when you add a pressure, generally the pressure is going to stimulate our horse to their nature. Now, you have to ask these questions in a way where it's not creating fear. It's just creating a little bit of uncertainty. And then what you do is you kind of hang around there until the horse softens, and then you take the pressure away. So they're starting to learn that they can control pressure by staying involved in the conversation. And this begins to develop the window where we can start helping them in a new way. So if I can see something my horse is worried about, and I've developed this mindset, then I can connect with them. And then when they start to soften, then I just walk them away. But I'm not going to put them right on top of it. And I think this is another one of the where I see people run into trouble is they think the horse is nervous of something. So you got to kind of make them get right beside it, or, and a lot of times people don't have the street credit to help a horse soften to that level of anxiety. So, and, this is something that I've learned through life, working with horses and journeying. Like, so let's just say we have to ride 5 miles before we're going to do a job. Well, you got to keep going because you got a job to do. So I can't stop at every little thing. And what I found through that is that all the horse needed me to do was say, "Oh, you're worried about that. Okay, can you soften a little bit? Like, where can you soften?" And then they let go and we keep going. And then they have another thing and they're a little tight, and then I soften them and we keep going. So what I'm saying to them is I'm saying, how much can you let go of it? I'm not telling them they have to. I'm just saying, how much could you? And every time they soften, it turns their brain back online. So you're going from self-preservation to thinking, self-preservation to thinking. And soon what happens is they start understanding they can think through pressure instead of have to run from pressure. But if the motive of our work has never transformed a horse from the space where self-preservation is their mode of knowledge with a human, like if I apply pressure and they tighten and leave, and I apply pressure and they tighten and leave, and I release because they went out on the circle and trotted, but they trotted in tension and anxiety, I am getting what I want through self-preservation. I am teaching my horse to spook. You are teaching them to tighten and run away from pressure. So when they spook, we shouldn't be surprised. You see, but then on a good day, we apply pressure, they tighten and leave, and I release them, but then I'm saying don't spook. You see, it from the horse's perspective, it's entirely contradictory.
You had a moment recently, and I would love if you could tell our listeners about this. You had a moment recently where you went through this very exercise with a horse. You said that you were in a warm-up arena and there was some light kind of coming down from the ceiling. Do you remember this story?
Absolutely.
This is a great example of that softening a little bit and then sort of moving on and not having your horse learn that every time there's something to be nervous about, that it's going to not only might they be nervous about something externally, but then they also have to be nervous about the rider's reaction, and they know that they're going to get yanked on or kicked on or whatever. Tell us that story.
Yeah, well, and you kind of open up two things there, so we'll come back to the second part. But
yeah, definitely.
This was just at a competition, and there was a lot of horses in the arena, and I think a lot of people can relate to this because the light was shining through a window, and it was hitting the ground and the side of the fence in this kind of weird way, and we're loping around, and then he would have to go through this light. Well, and everybody knows it looks weird initially, but then as you go through it, it disappears. So it's like two kind of anxieties that a horse would feel, right? So we started, moving, and the first time he went through it, he just kind of jumped forward, and it didn't turn into much more than that, but that was he was anxious about it. Well, the next time you can almost see him, he sees it coming, and he wanted to slow down, and I just let him slow down, but I just connected with my rein. And what I do with the horses in any of these situations is I always say, what can you do? And when you turn it into a what can you do space with softness, this is the other key, is I have to be able to feel, see, when a horse has an experience, you feel it through their muscles. Okay. It's not about what the physical body is doing. The embodiment of that moment is in the muscles. So when you connect with the muscles, which to me is where we really get into what is contact, like what are you doing with contact? Is it a physical form you're holding onto? Or is it the mind and the muscles that you're feeling so that you're in relationship with the mind of the horse through the contact so they can release their body to the work? Like it's really, really big. So all I do in that moment is I connect with my reins. He was braced. I felt him soften a little bit and he proceeded forward. And now here's the other part is that he went through it, then it disappears. And then, whoa, he's worried a little bit again.
Right.
And all I did was say, what can you do, bud? And he made it a little change. And then we went around again and made a little change. And then the other thing I also did was like, there's probably, I don't know, there's probably 70 horses in the ring. Like it's a, there's competitions, warm up pens. I think everybody understands that these are generally can be a chaotic environment because you've got some quiet horses and some that are a mess. But sometimes what I did is I actually follow in behind another horse and let that other horse lead and then ask him to soften. And I kept breaking it down in different positions, but just trying to set it up so that all I did to him was say, what can you do? And can you soften a little? And every time the softness causes thought. And actually when I was actually competing, we had to run through it. So that was also kind of fun because I was preparing him for that. And by the time, I don't know, it probably took us, 3 minutes of that. But the other side of it, what a horse learns, and this was the second part to what you had brought up, you have to recognize horses are not just worrying about the thing. They also learn to worry about your reaction to the thing. And I don't think we put enough energy on this. We know it with people. And I think a lot of times if we've ever had a boss or somebody we've been in a working environment with, and they're a little reactive or, get upset really fast, and then you make a mistake, you're not now worried about the mistake. You're worried about the reaction from your boss about that mistake. And if we really come down to it, it's the energy of that. When you have someone, when you make a mistake and they're like, hey, it's all good. Let's just figure this out. It's like, oh, you settle and you
then
feel
you actually
good.
can learn from that mistake.
Okay. Because your brain clicks on.
Because
okay.
You're not thinking that you're going to die.
Right. And now with horses, if you take all the cloud away that's in the human mind, that's all it is. When I get scared, I get self-preserving. Okay. And now horses need stimulus. Humans do not. You and I can become scared by thought alone. A horse needs a stimulation. But the two things we need for our horses in these moments is the first is just see what they can soften to and then proceed. And don't keep forcing them on that thing. When it comes up again, just see what they can do. And the next thing is be the soft answer you would love to have in that same situation for yourself. Okay. When a horse is in that moment and they're nervous, or if it was you in that moment, what would you love to feel in another person of how they held space for you? Now, in competitive environments, in these situations, we're not necessarily backing away. We got to kind of stay to task and kind of work our way through it. So I kind of want to build relationship around that. Like if we're going to do hard things, how do we do hard things together in a way that allows my horse to feel safer? And that's really what this is. As soon he goes through it, and that's what I would try to do. He softened a bit and kept moving. I just put my hand on his neck, just like, hey, good job. Good work, kid. And then again, a little soft, good job. And what ends up happening is all things, almost all things love to feel a sense of approval and that they've done well. Like we all love to have somebody that is influential in our life say, man, you just killed it. Like that was great. Yeah. Well done.
Yeah.
And so then, I don't just soak my horses with praise because we're working. Like there's lots of times we're actually doing things, but appropriately timed praise in the right moment can be so impacting because you're actually showing the horse what to expect from you. And when you find hard moments and then you're able to reinforce with praise in those moments or not just praise, but calmness. It's like you're nervous and I'm not. And that's leadership. Where you don't feel competent, I'm cool. You see, and I find that that's a big deal, especially in competition, because in competition, it's adding another layer of necessary development in us because now we're pushing ourselves too. So you're also teaching your horse, here's what you can expect from me when I'm pushed, when I'm challenged, when I'm struggling.
Oh, man.
And that takes us into the personal
So
development
good.
stuff, right? Like, yeah.
Oh man, that's so good. One of the things I want you to be specific about is the when you're inviting softness from your horse, or you're asking
Mm-hmm.
how much can you soften
Mm-hmm.
from a riding perspective, what what might that look like? What might that feel like? Is that
Mm-hmm.
moving away from your leg? Is that giving to the bit? What does that
Mm-hmm.
look like?
Yeah, this is where sometimes people struggle in the beginning, but it is more philosophical. If let's say I connect with my reins, in its whole form, softness in a full through form would almost, like, I define this slightly different than some people, but it's that to me is the essence of rebalancing, as the half halt, because you're connecting with your hand, you're re-engaging your seat, you apply a subtle pressure. There's a pressure inside of that, but as the horse feels that, they soften back to the hand and they elongate their top line. So there's a rebalancing and a resoftening. So when I connect initially, I'm trying always to listen. And I think sometimes as riders, we're bad listeners because we're too motivated for the thing we want. Like, but what we don't recognize is if you listen, you will have way more opportunity to get what you want, anyways. But if you don't
Mm.
listen and you push for the thing you want, as soon as any creature doesn't feel heard, they're immediately defensive.
Oh yeah.
All you have to do is let something feel heard and they become immediately open. Like, it's ridiculous. You can try it with anybody. When someone's speaking to you, just really listen and honor what they're
Try it on
saying.
the internet.
Right, right. Anywhere,
Everyone
right?
should.
Totally. So if you feel, let's say your horse tenses at an 8 and you connect with your hands and all of a sudden you feel a 7.5, relax, put your hand on their neck, let them feel it happening in you. And this is the other piece. Our horses can only soften to the degree that we're softening. See, a lot of times as riders, we want the horse to do the thing, but it's not happening in us. And we know this with people. And this can happen on the internet. It's like the more, when it's not happening in us, but we're pushing on something else to do it. This creates so much mud because it has a hypocritical energy to it. It's like,
Mm.
and so you and I touched on this when we first visited, but it's the idea that, you know, so I'm out here spooking at everything that comes up in my life. I'm allowing the world to control me. The world does a thing and now I'm mad, and the world does a thing and now I'm scared, and I'm influenced entirely by the external world, and I want my horse not to be.
Yeah.
But if that frequency is coming off me all the time, and horses are so feely, animals are so feely. Like, you watch a dog and one person, they wag their tail, and then the next
Oh
person they're
yeah.
kind of growling at. Like, it's like, what the heck is that? But animals are so feely, and so are horses in a different way. And the biggest thing this is why I have spent so much time, like, horses have drawn me to personal growth because of observing over and over and over the fact that the horses are primarily resonating off the energy that comes off me. They're not resonating off of just the competency of my techniques. Not to underestimate that. That is very valuable, but I feel like we overestimate using techniques to compensate for internal incompetencies. You see? So if you can start by becoming mindful of, how do I interact? Like, if I was a horse and someone else was dealing with me, how would I be able to be involved in those situations? Am I overreacting to everything around me and allowing the external world to change my feelings?
Mm.
And this is a beautiful privilege. And obviously there's extremes, but the beautiful thing we're all granted is that we can control how we feel and how we respond. We might not be able to control the world around us, but we can control how we feel and how we respond. And I want that to be my primary example to my horses. So as they are reacting, of course they're going to do that. They're horses. But yet, on the other hand, I have this big brain and I can process. So if I desire my horse to stop spooking, then I need to do a little bit of self-reflection on what's happening in me, in my world. Am I allowing everything around me to control me? Am I hot because somebody says a thing, or mad because of this, or am I able to maybe breathe through things and allow things to pass and allow myself to feel how I desire? And that is the high answer to helping our horses not spook. It's that we do enough work within ourselves that we're not attached to it. And then we can be an example of something new which is what leads a horse to a change. So leadership
Mm.
isn't about making a horse do stuff. That's dominance. Leadership is about doing something in yourself enough that others are drawn to it. That's leadership.
Mm. One of the things that I know and I knew coming into this that I wanted to ask you about is how do we become less reactive to our horses' spooks? Because so
Yeah.
often it's not even the issue of the spook itself, it's the uncertainty of when they'll do it or if they'll do it, or
Totally.
the anxiousness and the anticipation. Will I be able to stay on? I know that they always don't like purple flowers, and there's purple flowers at this jump, and
Mm-hmm.
the history and sometimes the baggage that we might bring to that moment in our riding, whether it's from that horse or from a totally different horse.
Mm-hmm.
And you've spoken to that, I think. How we become less reactive to spooks is also how we become less reactive to life and the
Exactly.
world and everything around us.
Yeah.
That's
That's why it's
also,
mindset first.
that's what?
That's why it's mindset first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do we begin with that? Where do we begin with that? Maybe off the horse, like
Mm-hmm.
where did that begin with you?
Yeah.
What work do we need to be thinking about doing to become a little bit less reactive? Because the other thing I want to acknowledge is when horses spook, and I've experienced this in myself and I've seen many other people experience this, there is sometimes a reaction of anger
Sure.
when a horse spooks.
Oh yeah. Because it's
So
fear
we are
first.
meeting their fear
Mm-hmm.
with anger and how dare you unseat me,
Mm-hmm.
or how dare
Mm-hmm.
you startle me that way, or that's so stupid that you would spook at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to imagine that sometimes, unfortunately, that would lead to punishing the horse.
Yeah. The big thing is that we have not relinquished the horse's actions as personal attacks. This is the big thing. My horse is doing it to me.
To me.
It's
Mhm.
like the horse has some personal agenda, and they 100% never do. Like the horse is too self-focused. All they're thinking about is not dying. Like they are not thinking about you in those moments. They're not. It is not about us. They're just trying to figure out how to get by, and relinquishing them to that actually releases a lot of tension, because now it's like no, it's not personal, and that makes everything a lot easier. Now, before I kind of get into what you asked there, I also wanted to say that the necessity for doing pressure based work is actually gaining more importance as competitive horses are being bred to be lighter and lighter. We want horses so light, like so light to the aids, reactive and responsive, so they can just snap out those movements. But the problem is when lightness is bred in, self-preservation is still in the stock model. So if you don't do a certain work to help them understand how to respond softly and mentally present, giving control to pressure in a new mind, their self-preservation will go into their lightness. So they will become so reactive. That's what we call reactive, is lightness plus self-preservation creates reactivity. Okay, so if you don't meet those needs in a way the horse can understand something new, your horse will become reactive. And that's where they're like, it's like the simplest of things, and they are jumping sideways. And then in our heads, we're like, you've seen that a million times. Why are you doing that? Well, they're doing it because they're a horse, but they're also hybrid. They're bred to be super light. They're bred to compete at the Olympics. So many
Yeah.
horses now are being bred so hot to
Yeah.
go and win, when unfortunately 3/4 of the population, maybe even more, 90% of the population isn't going to be riding. They're not going to be doing that, but we love to have those horses. So some of us shouldn't, maybe, but others, if we do, boy, do you really need to take care of that base early. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I actually want to stay on this topic a little bit because this is
Sure.
very prevalent, especially to this audience. And we've had these conversations on the podcast before of like, what influence does breeding and our
Mm-hmm.
desire to breed these super athletes, that we, even as sometimes amateur riders, well,
Yeah,
we might get there someday. We might want the potential for them to be able to go do a 3-star, or a
totally.
intermediate level eventing, or a pre St. George in dressage.
Mm-hmm.
um, we are sometimes looking at stargazing a little bit in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what we are selecting for in our own horses. And
Totally.
if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, Josh, you're saying that we have the way that horses are being bred, because we are breeding these athletes that their jobs require, or we as riders would like for them to be very light.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're breeding them that way, we are maybe a little slow on the uptake of, okay, how are the needs of those types of
Mm-hmm.
horses different than horses as they were bred 100 years ago, or they were
Yeah,
bred very differently, or horses that are not bred for sport.
sure.
We don't talk about this that much. I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that there's breeding, groups, people who are really focused on breeding that talk about this quite a bit, but I think as average riders, we don't really think that much about what is my horse's DNA? What are their natural tendencies? And
Mm-hmm.
from that, what do they need from me?
That's
We
right.
just see what can they do for me,
Uh,
not what can I do for them.
or what have I seen their lineage do? And I like
Yeah.
it. And when you take, so then this is the way I look at it. The lightness and the inner attributes that the horse has to be directly related to the competencies that you can produce now or through good mentorship. Okay. So if you're going to pick a horse, you have to be careful that you have a knowledge of how to meet that horse's needs so that that lightness doesn't turn into self-preservation. So much of the spooking and the things these horses are doing is because a lot of times, if okay, depending on our interpretation, will dictate how we handle things. So the horse is nervous and scared, and we start containing and holding. We get
Mm-hmm.
after the horse and we discipline them for it because we've interpreted the horse as being bad. Well, now you turn all that lightness into fear. Well, now they're super reactive to the things that make them scared. This promotes it promotes spookiness, it promotes bolting, it promotes bucking. And these are the horses that just freak out under more pressure. So we take them to a competition and they just can't handle it because it's more pressure. But if you take the degree of lightness and you can honor what the need is and you can meet the self-preserving need, you can help understand what that need is and you can help the horse understand how to control that need in a different way. So you keep turning their thinking brain on. Now the lightness goes to the aids instead of to their fear. And that's the biggest piece. So for me, it's like I don't actually mind if people buy super light horses, but you just have to be willing to either embark on the journey that will mean interchange in yourself, okay, to get to a place where you're doing that work. Also that you have the support, but that you're recognizing if you don't meet those needs, that lightness can turn into self-preservation very easily because they're bred to just be snappy, like quick and fast and sharp, which is what finished horses it takes. It doesn't matter what kind of competition, that's what gets you the edge at the top, is that snappiness, because everything
Yeah.
is just a
Yeah.
little bigger, it's just a little snap, they jump a little higher,
Fractions. Yeah.
it's totally because it's slivers at the top,
Mm-hmm.
but at the bottom it's a mess because we're not handling that lightness in a way that meets the need. It can often unfortunately be through containment and control, and we're just hoping we can get there. But what I've just found, I've worked thousands of horses and helped people in all different disciplines because my focus isn't about discipline, it's about how does your horse feel and how do they move. So I help lots of different people all over, but it's given me a neat breadth to kind of like see what people want. And then the focus is, if you can take that lightness and you can meet the need, all of a sudden you get to shape and play with lightness because the horse doesn't need their body back. And that's really the goal, right? Is if you meet the need, the horse doesn't need their body. They're like, what do you want to do? Sure, let's do that. Oh, I don't
Yeah.
understand, but I'll try. And once you have tried, well, you're gold. Like training's really not that hard.
I want you to just say this once more, because I want this to be very clear for people. You explained to me the difference between lightness
Mm,
and softness, and that those are
yeah.
two different things. Can you
Mhm.
define those things for us?
Yeah, a lot of times those terms are used as the same. And I think a lot of times people will think that they're the same. Um, the way I look at it is that lightness is about the external responsiveness. It's about how well a horse would move off of a request. And for, to have a horse do really well, they need to generally be light. Softness is how they feel, what's going on in their muscles, how their history has formed itself in their body. Um, there's so many pieces to what's happening inside of a horse that is historically written and also character written, like their personality, their way is written in the code of their muscles, because their mind infuses directly into the effects of the muscles, which is why when we really think about athleticism, you cannot leave the mind out of it. Like, you can't leave how they feel out of it, because when a horse is in anxiety, they're totally inverted. So the opposite of a horse being ready to be athletic. So relationally, the way to the athleticism is through the relationship, because you can't get one without the other, which again, I think is a really cool universal code. Like, that's written above us, not in our work. Like, it's just that. So softness is, how does your horse feel? How your horse feels dictates what they are willing to do with their physical body. So if we
And
don't
just
take
to be
care
clear,
of
how the horse feels within themselves, not how they
it,
feel to us
that's correct.
necessarily. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how they feel in themselves will be demonstrated by how they handle themselves under areas of struggle. So, like, if you had a horrible day, like horrible, and you get home and you stub your toe on somebody's shoes,
Oh.
you might do an entire
It's like a
family
crisis.
lesson. Okay. You will lose it, and you will have a family meeting on shoe placement. It's like, it's about the shoes, when it's not. It's like,
Stop talking about things that have happened to me in the last 2 weeks, Josh. It's
right.
rude. Do you have a camera in my house?
Who doesn't relate to it though, right? Like, if you have kids and family, it's like, it
Yeah.
happens. But this is the same as the horses. So the horses are having a hard time. They're not being heard. They're trying to get by. They don't feel safe. All of the things, we're a little bit containment based. We're making them stand. They don't have a lot of say in the work. So they feel trapped, and it builds, 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 builds. And then all of a sudden the cat jumps over the fence and they friggin' lose it.
Yeah.
When it's like,
Yeah.
it wasn't the cat. It
No.
was all the other backstory, and it's no different than us. If we're doing our work, if we're doing the work inside ourselves, and then someone does something, it's like, meh, it's like water off a duck's back. But when you're taking things in and you're having a hard time, and you're, kind of a victim to the world, like, it feels like the world is just deciding how we respond. It's like the one little thing just sets us off. So softness is the code with which the world has, so excuse me, what's going on inside is either the code the world has defined or the work we've done personally. Okay. And that's the story of when I talk about softness, it's that inner story, like what's going on. And horses aren't different than people that way. All of us store our experiences, our emotions, our character, and our tendencies inside our musculature. You have anxieties, your body starts to go into fight or flight. Again, the difference between people and horses is that people can do that by thought alone. So we can be sitting here and you could be thinking about, oh shoot, did I turn that stove off? And now all of a sudden you're in like, bah,
Yeah.
where a horse needs a cat to jump over the fence.
Mm-hmm.
They need you to pick up the rein. But as soon as you pick up that rein, it brings up that story.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important to go through these stories with horses, like to go through it and help them soften it. And then it's like, yep, that's how you feel. Okay, can we think of that different? Good. And when you get to a spot where your horse starts to anticipate that you're going to be different and the way you handle them is going to be different, life all of a sudden changes.
Yeah, it's reprogramming, which
Totally.
a lot of us
Totally.
can use. One thing I'm curious about, Josh, is, there's horses kind of have their different MOs for spooking. Like,
Yeah.
and sometimes you'll get a warning about this before you actually get on a horse. If you're riding a
Mhm.
friend's horse or you catch riding a horse, like, oh, if he spooks, he always ducks left. If he
Right.
spooks, it's not a big he just jumps. There's
Mhm.
horses that spin, there's horses that just startle, there's horses
Yeah.
that bolt, and sometimes it becomes patterned. I'm just wondering if you feel like horses that spook a certain way, where that comes from.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it stems back to, if you think for you and I, if we had, like, when you get stressed out, where do you store your tension? You're going to have a place in
Oh,
your body.
yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so then this is really pertains to softness, because or tension internally, because when a horse starts to get nervous, they start to pack that tension in a certain part of their body, which then facilitates them physically moving a certain way to act on that tension. So then you have a bucker or a bolter or a rearer, or they duck a certain way because the way the tension builds up, it almost activates the body in that way. So it's very normal. It's very normal. We actually don't even realize that we would act a certain way, but we do it different. The horse, it takes their physical body, but your tone would change a certain way. You would engage the world, but with a pattern when certain people would say a certain thing a certain way. So it's all patterned because our brain clicks into self-preservation and then runs a system. So this brings us back to, primarily, this is about pressure-based responses, because the horse is feeling pressure, it goes into tension, feel pressure, goes into tension, feels pressure, goes into tension, and then one little thing, but now they're already, it's like the wheels are already turned toward the ditch.
Right.
And all you did is hit the gas that one last time, and whoa, and you're saying, why did they go towards the ditch? But it's because the tension. So if you can become mindful, and I have a whole series on this, I call it body mapping, but it's this idea that you have the ability to feel the inside of a horse, and you can feel when that story builds up, you can connect to it. And then you can wait until you can give them a new response. And when you can start taking those old responses and create new responses, now the tension that built has now been diminished. And that should be at the essence of contact. If that is not at the essence of contact, we are diminishing the sacredness of the reins. Okay. The sacredness of the rein is the thread between you and your best friend while you're talking. That's contact. What flows between you and another person is contact. With horses, it's a little bit more tangible. Through my seat, through my legs, through my hands is contact. You're going to feel the horse. But if I diminish it to physical movements, I lose the sacred connection of the energy and the muscular connection and thought and all the stuff that lies underneath it. But if at the essence of contact, and I encourage everybody to try this, like when you pick your reins up, just sit there for a minute and just feel what's on the other end of it. Feel what's happening in your horse. Sense what's happening. Breathe and sit there until you can just start to feel your horse receive you. See how long that takes. And then start feeling your horse make an internal change. When we have that, then the contact to physical guidance and form is entirely different. It's entirely different.
This might be a little bit of an off-the-wall question, but we are a man and a woman here sitting on this call.
Yeah.
Do you think that there tends to be a difference in the masculine versus the feminine ability to do that?
Yeah. I think that there's just a balance of, it's masculine and feminine is a funny term. And it's, that I think that everything kind of resonates a little bit on both sides. Like you can feel there's certain elements and attributes.
Yeah.
But yes, generally men have a quicker ability to protection and aggression. Like you would generally say, it's been in men for thousands of years to protect and provide. Like that's, so men are very evolutionarily toned to like, and so men will get mad quick, like, and get firm quick. And generally, women are more nurture based. They're going to be softer. Okay, so the what I end up seeing again is the balance. A lot of times a man will be very clear, but will also be sometimes too firm. And where a woman will be way more nurturing, but will sometimes lose clarity because they're trying to consider all the pieces of making sure everything's okay and that I didn't do anything wrong. And that, so to me, it's like a yin and a yang.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like that. And I suppose, yeah, my reason in asking that is, partially because the horse doesn't get to choose, right?
Yeah.
The horses have to sort of take us as we are. We choose them more often than they choose us. And I think that being aware of those tendencies, I just, I have lots of, female friends who ride, and the common thread is that we all just overthink
Mm-hmm.
everything. We
Mm-hmm.
overthink this so, and that turns off our ability to just feel
Mm-hmm.
and to just sit and do what you're talking about, where it's just like pick up the contact and just tell your brain to
Mm-hmm.
shut up for a
Mm-hmm.
second
Mm-hmm.
and just feel.
Yep.
Um, and that's a responsibility. I think what we're really talking about there is part of your responsibility as a rider.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that, you know, so much of what we're talking about is like there's this spectrum, right, um of dominance there, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there I think in horsemanship there was probably a, you know, a moment of dominance is the way, and then as you sort of said too, like the pendulum kind of swung the
Mm-hmm.
other direction, and then
Mm-hmm.
everybody got scared to touch their horse. And both of those things, I think what we've established in this conversation is both of those things can be scary for a horse,
Mm-hmm.
to have no contact with you at all or to be like totally oppressed.
Yeah.
um and that has to do a lot with spooking. One question I do have, Josh, is, you know, as we've established and had so much of this conversation about spooking and where it comes from and how we can respond and how we can think about it and how we can practice it even when we're not in the saddle, which is just like awesome. Um, do you think, are you saying that horses don't really spook out of nowhere? Because that is the common complaint, right? That like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
my horse like, spooks out of nowhere. I didn't see it coming.
Sure.
People are either worried about it all the time or they never saw it coming.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and that
Do you
comes
think
from
that
two reasons.
happens?
Yeah. The first reason is, so let's say it comes out of nowhere. It generally means a person's priority is lightness and not softness. We're not actually feeling the inside of the horse.
Mm,
So we're just moving, and I was doing leg yield, and all of a sudden my horse is jumping sideways, but we weren't feeling what the fabric of what was happening inside the horse. And then for the people that are thinking about it all the time, what happens is it's transformed their energy and what they're giving off. So that takes us to the red car theory, which is when you're looking at buying a red car, all you see is red cars. Okay. And when you're thinking about spooking, the fabric of what's in you is now fear based. So, I talk about the law of intensity, which is all things become whatever the prominent energy is. So if you hang around someone who's super critical, like they are super critical, it's hard for you not to start becoming critical. If you're hanging around good-minded, personal growth type people, you're going to find yourself growing. Like you just can't help it because that's the tone of the conversations. So if it's in you, that's why I say it's so important to do your own work. Like you have to become mindful of what you're doing because we underestimate how much our horses get off of the way we look at life, because the way you look at life moves your energy and your horse feels your energy. So that's the fabric. It becomes the limiting factor. It also becomes your greatest success when you do it because it changes the way you do everything. Now, I just wanted to say off that kind of, we talked masculine, feminine, and just the difference in natures, but I have observed, because I've ridden with lots of different people, I've traveled all over the place, and seen a variety of spectrum, but I've observed some people that are super firm, like super firm, but very fair, that they will get in and it's done, and their horses will have a relationship with that. Now, they might not develop that softer side, like that deeper connection, but they have a relationship with each other. And then you can take people who are really trying to be relational, and they might have some of those softer moments, but they have no clarity and connection of how to interact when things get a little bit dicier. So it's so funny because as we're talking about pendulum swinging, what I find is whether in a moment it is a necessity for clarity and firmness, or it's a necessity for hearing and listening and feeling, the biggest key is that in any of it, the muddiness comes, and you've said that about maybe some of your friends, where it's like we want to build it and we want it to be okay, but even the heart of that, it's like, oh, I don't want to make mistakes, and I don't want to, but if you take firmness and you say, you sorry horse. See, now what we've done is we've missed the necessity for the internal calmness. And that takes us to the necessity of our internal work. Like, how much priority do we put into our own internal stillness? How much priority do we put into what is the horse feeling from me? When I do a thing, what is it that they're feeling from me? So if I have to be a little stronger to build a boundary or to make something clear, that I'm doing that with a certain level of connection and clarity. And if I need to have a moment where it's quieter and soft and resetting, that I'm not doing that out of weakness and fear. You see, that I'm doing it out of a clarity and a clear mind. And all of that comes down to how often do we prioritize our own internal medium? And you kind of asked that earlier about like, what kind of things do you do? And, I think there's a lot of pieces that people try. And I talk about, meditation, whatever. That's just the idea that you can become aware of what's going on within you. Um, and then I also talk about proactive meditation, and I can talk about breath work and proactive breath work. And the idea is whatever it is that works for you, like whatever you like, sometimes listening to music, going for walks, anything, fishing's great for meditation. It's like super still, whatever, um, that you think of it, but then you have to get to where you can think of it in action. Because a lot of times what they do is I call them closet meditators. It's like when you get in there, boy, you can just get in deep. But then as soon as you open the door and come back out, we just go right back to all the things that we do. So there's this great
Oh,
divide.
yeah.
I also talk about it like Facebook posts. It's like everybody agrees with them. It's like, yeah, like that's, be the change, whatever the posts say. And then all of a sudden something pushes on us and we are not the change, like we're losing our junk. So so the biggest key to really being able to do work within yourself is that two-step of whatever works for you, to start trying to find a level of calmness,
Yeah.
but then try to activate that in an area where prior you may not have been able to. Like sometimes when someone might have said something that stirs you, just try to breathe through it, like activate it in the moment. And then what you're doing is you're then going to start gaining the wheels to do it with your horse. And if your horse feels you trying, they're going to spook less. Like it just
Josh.
happened.
Ah, so cool.
Yeah.
Okay. You just gave us, we're going to count that as your first one, but at the end of every episode, we do something called 3 little things. So that is going to be our first one, Josh, because that's brilliant, is practicing in your daily life, just being able to, like, when something rubs up against you, when something kind of pushes you the wrong way, being able to breathe through it, take a moment, sit with it, be with it, and then trying that with your horse as well. What are 2 more things that we can do as riders to respond better when our horses spook, and cultivate a relationship in which maybe they're a little bit less inclined to do so?
So cool. I would say that another one that I would want people to think about is just to recognize the power of your interpretation. So you look at some people and it's like they're eternal optimists. They see something and it's like, it doesn't matter. It's this or this. You see other people where it's like, that's bad. That's horrible. Is to recognize that moves your energy. Your thoughts move your energy. So start to become mindful of the way that you think, and always ask the question, is the way that you're thinking developing deeper relationship, or is the way you're thinking creating more chaos? And if it's creating more chaos, then we need to go and do the work. Like you got to do the work. Sometimes we need
That
help
is
to
your
do that.
self-diagnostic. Like that's
Totally.
your BS meter
Yep.
on yourself.
Totally. If it's causing chaos and more in you, the lens with which you have chosen is a self-preserving lens. You're just protecting yourself, and so we're doing the very thing we're telling our horses not to do. And I don't care who it is. You can feel the people that have done the work and have been the place you want to be, because it comes out of them different. They're not the ones, and generally they're reaching back to help. There's a difference in the feeling versus criticism and rigidity and guardedness. This is the sign of a lack of the work being done. Okay, so if we want our horses to have success, they need to feel that happening in us. So to recognize, listen to yourself, listen to what charges you, listen to what's like, are you letting the world impact you? And so I talk about the difference between reactive emotional horsemanship and relational horsemanship. And reactive emotional horsemanship says that the horse is being disrespectful, they're being bad, and they need to be pressured to be shown, like who's the boss, or
Right.
Okay. And it charges this belief that, yeah, I feel justified now in pressuring my horse. They're not allowed to do that. All that is a mindset, but look at the power in it. Okay. Now I feel justified to whip my horse on the butt. Now, most people that do that, they feel justified. Later on, I don't care. There's a niggling that it's like, that didn't feel right. But it's like, but every time, because that's the path I have. So there's the difference between brain information and soul information. Like, I'm trying to develop a horsemanship around soul empowerment. Soul empowerment says, I want to be soulful, but I want to do hard stuff. Like, I want to go out there and conquer. I want to go and do things. I don't want to just sit on the fence. But on the same hand, I don't want to sacrifice my horses just for the desire to go and do things. So the more we can have that kind of mindful, soulful empowerment, we're working towards being it. Okay. Does that make sense?
I'm just like goosebumps over here. Yes, it makes sense.
Cool.
Really, really cool.
And I think the last one is just to understand that the things your horses are doing are based on met or unmet needs. We have to change our mindset around trying to figure out what their need is instead of trying to fix the behavior. Because there is an element of fixing behavior, like your horse can't run you over, but you have to recognize the reason that's happening is because something's missing. Like, they're not trying to be bad. Horses actually don't want to be bad. They're not even, that is not even on their radar. Horses are perfectly respectful to the balance of the relationship. Ooh, this one's tough. Horses are perfectly respectful to the balance of the relationship. If we're creating a chaotic thing where there's no needs met, the horse will be in chaos. They're going to do dumb things because they're not thinking. Okay. But if you change the form and they will respect that. So it's like, so be mindful that whatever's going on for your horse is a demonstration of met or unmet needs. And if the horse is becoming willing to give their body, it means you've met their needs. This is where training begins. To me, training doesn't begin until my horse feels led. Now, that isn't a linear thing. That can be a daily thing. Like, there's going to be some days my horses are really struggling. So I spend the entire day just working on getting them to soften and getting them where I want. And the last 5 minutes, I work on shoulder in. Okay. Or some days, for 5 minutes, it's like check, 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 check. Or by the way they come in the pen, I just know they're gold today. So we spend the entire day, and by the end, we're working on flying changes. It doesn't matter.
Right.
But if you can take care of the need, and in the need being met, you work on the body and you allow the horse to give you their body, and then you shape it. Oh my goodness, the world shifts. And that's the idea. And do I do it perfectly? No. Do I make mistakes? All the time. But that's not the point. It's about just trying to live within a mindset with grace for our horses and grace for ourselves, and just start to have fun with the process. But it comes by seeing it different.
It's also, I think, very hopeful to leave everybody with that message, because it also means that repair is possible.
Oh my goodness.
If your relationship with your horse is on the rocks at the moment, it doesn't mean that it will be forever.
That's right. When relationships are on the rocks, the key is to do our own work first. Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, you gotta do, when we can take responsibility for how things are coming out of us, you now set the stage to lead change. Okay. The biggest key, and most of us, that's what we want to do. People come to me all the time initially. It's getting less and less as my approach is becoming more clear to people, but they want me to change a behavior. It's like, I need this to change. Well, okay. You might want that to change, but the question is if there's a pattern, there's a responsibility on our side of it too. So we want to take stock of that, really do our own work, change our mindset and how we're looking at it. And then we can start having a conversation about behavior and actions. And what I find for a lot of people is actually those things just fall away because they're defense mechanisms. And why does a defense mechanism come up? Generally because the horse's needs aren't met or they're not feeling heard. Well, you answer that and the defense goes away.
Yeah. There's a real theme to all of this, Josh. That's so good. This is conversation, honestly, has been like pure gold. I mean, even like the first time we talked, there were moments over the weekend that I was like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? And then your voice was like literally in my head. And so
Awesome.
I am so excited that we could put your voice in a lot more people's brains besides just mine. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing a bit of your knowledge. I think it's transformative.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so happy to hear that. That's great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.